Hi there guys and welcome to Cerny Gaming. Thanks to all your support, we are fast approaching that 1k subscriber mark, so if you want to help support the channel, then don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons and drop your questions into the comments section below. Today we are going to be checking out my updated Plagued Aegis build, which is a Necromancer Tank. I absolutely love Necromancer Tanks. I think they're the best at what they do and they bring a hell of a lot to the table in addition to raw survivability. Let's get cracking with the core details of the build, starting with the race. We're running an Argonian here because I think their passives are best suited for synergizing amazingly well with the Necro Tank's toolkit. Additional max stats in all resources, extra healing power, and a really amazing potion activated passive that restores a ton of resources to us makes Argonians one of the best tank races for responding to any situation effectively. There are a few other good options that you can consider. Nords are practically tied with Argonians for usefulness, bringing extra resistances and a really nifty ultimate restore mechanic that no other race has, which is great for any tank class but especially useful for Necromancers, bringing higher uptime on the major vulnerability debuff from our Colossus. Imperials are also a good option with a cost reduction passive in addition to nice simple max stats in health and stamina. This is a good race for tanks, but I like the more dynamic effects that Argonians and Nords bring to the table, but out of these three options it really comes down to a matter of preference. The final race to consider is the Breton. Now this one is an unconventional one, but hear me out because it's surprisingly good and I think it competes with the three options above for a position here. A big cost reduction to Magicka abilities on top of raw Magicka recovery helps with all of your buffs, debuffs, healing and shields, as does extra max Magicka. We also get a massive boost to spell resistance, which increases when we have a negative elemental status effect on us. Bretons may seem like an odd option, but they are surprisingly effective. For our Munderstone, we're actually going to be using the Atronach, which brings additional Magicka recovery to the table. It can be tempting to go for the Lady or the Lord for more resistances or health, but realistically the build will have plenty of this and we're not going to need the extra. The Atronach helps immensely with keeping up buffs and debuffs as well as healing and shielding, so definitely go for this one. My favourite food buff to use for tanking is the Bewitched Sugar Skulls. This brings a huge amount of max stats to all three of our resource pools and even adds some health recovery to boot. It helps to carry a variety of different potions, including single stat trash ones for when things aren't too intense. Your main option, however, should be simple tri-stat potions, which will give you a huge batch of all three resources on top of resource recoveries as well, which will be the most useful to us and are amplified by Argonian racial passives. Alright, now that we've got a good outline of the core details of the build, let's move on to our gear. Now we actually have two setups here, one for trials and one for 4-man dungeons. Let's start with our trial setup. In addition, we will also be checking out a non-trial gear option for you guys who are just setting up your tank or otherwise aren't ready for trials yet. Our first set is Perfected Claw of Yolnahkrin, which is simply unrivaled as an incredibly powerful tank set in all content. You can find this in Vet Sunspire or the normal version from normal mode, and it brings 2 lines of health, 1 line of stamina, minor Aegis at all times, and minor courage to your group when you use a taunt. There's no cooldown on that, so it can have 100% uptime if you're on the ball and your group's DPS will be increased massively. Our second set can be found in Vet Rockgrove, Perfected Saxhleel Champion. Feel free to use the normal set from normal mode if you're not up to the task of Vet Rockgrove just yet. This set feels like it was especially designed with a Necromancer in mind, giving 2 lines of stamina, 1 line of Magicka, and a really impressive 5th piece bonus that gives our entire group major force for 15 seconds when we use our Glacial Colossus. This, combined with the Colossus' own major vulnerability debuff, equates to a monumental window of burst damage that can be coordinated with your team at vital moments. So far you can see a strong theme of group support, which is exactly why we run in Kratos' Behemoth. Most DPS are Magicka, most of whom run fire staves, and there are many other sources of fire damage as well. And Kratos will boost overall DPS by a nice amount, so it's definitely worth running. Since we only need to run Saxhleel Champion on the back bar Ice Staff, the front bar weapons open up for some utility for ourselves. The Perfected Master Sword and Shield, or the normal version if it's more accessible, will grant you healing and resistances when you use your taunt. This is incredibly useful because it scales on your max health and will take a lot of pressure off your healers and allow you to sustain yourself nicely, especially when combined with the Hungry Scythe for a magicka costing alternative. For a non-trial option for this setup, simply replace Claw of Yornokrin with Torug's Pact. Now, Torug's Pact is a really powerful set that increases the potency and reduces the cooldown of your weapon enchantments. This allows for much higher uptime on a much stronger version of your Crusher and Weakening enchantments, massively boosting support for your group. This set, despite being crafted and easy to obtain, is powerful all the way through endgame content, so do not underestimate it. Next, Saxdale Champion can be replaced with another underestimated set that is absolutely perfect for Necromancer tanks, Arcasis Genius. This set will give you 2 lines of health, some resistances, and allow you to grant 44 ultimate to yourself and 3 others when you drink a potion. Not only does this directly provide group support with that ultimate gain, but it synergizes perfectly with the Argonian potion passive and also gets you to your Colossus a lot faster, so all around very valuable. Now let's move on to the skills for this setup. On the front bar we have Silver Leash, Inner Rage, Hungry Scythe, Pierce Armor, and Heroic Slash with Renewing Animation for our ultimate. And on the back bar we use Blockade of Frost, Necrotic Potency, Empowering Grasp, Spirit Guardian, and Beckoning Armor with Glacial Colossus for our main ultimate. Silver Leash is only for mobs or when the boss fights have adds that can be pulled in. It helps immensely with managing environment and shepherding enemies into optimal places in the area for your group to DPS them down, but if you have no need for this, then feel free to switch it out for some utility such as Defensive Stance for a shield. Inner Rage is similar in that it is primarily used for ranged battles as a taunt. However, I keep it slotted even in melee fights that have no additional ranged enemies. This is because if I am in an intense fight and I don't want to waste my stamina more than I have to, this allows me to use a magicka costing taunt, meaning I can control my resources much more efficiently. No Necromancer Tank is complete without Hungry Scythe. With our additional magical recovery, and even more so if you choose a Breton, we can sustain healing ourselves with this magicka costing, health scaling, instant heal, and heal over time practically indefinitely. It's so useful and should always be slotted. Pierce Armor is our primary taunt and provides monumental resistance debuffs against your opponent, meaning your group will be capable of dealing tons more DPS throughout the duration of a fight. It also activates our master weapon, granting us a strong heal and a resistance boost as well, so it ends up being an incredibly efficient skill. If you're dealing with a boss, Heroic Slash will be invaluable, especially in prolonged fights such as in Trials. Running this will get way more out of your ultimate and your Saxdale Champion set as well, so it's definitely worth it. If you're dealing with mobs though, feel free to switch this out for something more useful, such as Agony Totem for a valuable area control option. Renewing Animation is a bit of a flex ultimate. It can absolutely turn the tides of a fight that's going sour and takes lots of pressure off the rest of your group if you have fallen allies, but if you're in a good group that's well organized, you may not actually need this. In that case, feel free to use Barrier instead for a defensive ultimate option, or Temporal Guard for 100% uptime on minor protection. Moving on to the back bar, Blockade of Frost has some amazing utility that is one of the main reasons that we run a Frost Staff, alongside the additional resource management options it brings. Area CC options, along with a chance for the minor brittle debuff and a projectile shield for you and your group, makes this an incredibly valuable and efficient skill. Leading into our group support theme, Necrotic Potency allows us to build our ultimate faster by consuming the corpses of enemies, our armor, and our Spirit Guardian. Use it every chance you can so you can pump out those important buffs as often as possible. Next up is Empowering Grasp. If you can sustain the uptime on this, then it is a highly versatile skill that allows you to both control the battlefield and give the valuable Empower buff to your group, boosting light stat damage. If you play DPS, then you know light stat weaving contributes one of the highest damage sources for DPS, so this helps a ton. One of a Necromancer's most important skills is Spirit Guardian. This skill will give you a healing over time, but more importantly, will grant us 10% damage mitigation, which is massive and allows us to take all that much more punishment. That's not all though, it will also activate the Undead Confederate passive, which will give us extra recoveries, so be sure to keep it up at all times. Beckoning Armor is our major resolve buff, granting us valuable resistances. It also serves as an automatic pull against enemies that hit us with ranged attacks, help it to conserve our resources and control the arena. Our primary ultimate is Glacial Colossus, which we want to be using as much as possible. This skill will deal decent AoE damage, stun all enemies on the final hit, and apply the really amazing major vulnerability debuff, causing all enemies to take 10% more damage. This synergizes wonderfully with Untitled Champion and should be used as often as possible. Okay, so now that we've looked at our trial setup, let's take a look at our 4-man dungeon setup, starting with the gear. We're still running Yolnahkriin since it really is just that strong, but Untitled Champion's overall effectiveness drops off a little in smaller groups. Instead, we will be running Powerful Assault on the back bar. This gives our group a really nice damage boost whenever we use a skill from the Assault skill line, and we'll adjust our skills accordingly to accommodate this. We're also going to be switching out Encratis for Engine Guardian, which will provide us with valuable sustain options that can otherwise be difficult to maintain in 4-man content. This is a bit of a flex slot though, and if you feel that you can sustain yourself well, you could instead go for something more situational. Symphony of Blades is good for the rest of your group if you can backbar Echoing Vigor, while Ladythorn can be useful for certain situations where there's a lot of outgoing AoE damage, such as Ladythorn's own boss fight. Use your best judgment. We do still use the Master Sword and Board on the front, since it's far too valuable to let go of and really shines even more in 4-man content, when the healer can often be stretched thin in intensive situations. For our 4-man non-trial setup, we'll still be using Torog's Pat in the same way as our non-trial gear 12-man setup. However, for this one, we'll still be using Powerful Assault on the back bar and jewellery, because it remains consistent and reliable for 4-man content. As for our skills, there's fairly minimal changes. Where Renewing Animation was previously a flex ultimate, it's now practically mandatory for getting your group back in the game in a tough spot. On the back bar, we also switch out Empowering Grasp, which doesn't do much with only 2 DPS, and instead we use either Echoing Vigor or Razor Caltrops. The former allows for some subsidiary backup healing for you and your team, while the latter allows for more area control and debuffing. These two are the main choices because we need to use them to activate our Powerful Assault set. Moving on, we'll take a look at the champion points we're using, starting in the Warfare section. Our slotted perks are Ironclad for direct damage mitigation, Unassailable for AoE damage mitigation, Duelist Rebuff for single target mitigation, and Enduring Resolve for damage over time mitigation. Things really start coming together over in the fitness section, where we get a lot of survivability options. Our slotted perks here are Sustained by Suffering for resources when we have a negative effect on us, Slippery for a free break free now and again, Boundless Vitality for additional health, and Fortified for more resistances. It's important to note that this section in particular should be adjusted to the content that you're playing if it's needed. And that should be all that you need to know to build your very own Plagued Aegis. It really is a powerful build that allows you to provide the maximum support to your group available while still retaining an awesome level of survivability to take the pressure off your other support group members. Thanks very much guys, remember to hit those like and subscribe buttons, and as always have a great time adventuring in Tamriel. Bye guys.